Welcome back to the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. Well, this is Hal Herring. We're sponsored now by Sitka Gear. Sitka's the sole sponsor of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. Anybody listening to this probably knows that Sitka products are designed to get you through any of the most radical situations in the backcountry, or in the duck marsh or on the river. So if you're not already acquainted with their products, please check that out. We're proud to be associated with them. I'd also like to invite all the listeners of the podcast to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers 7th Annual Rendezvous. It's going to be the biggest gathering of conservation-minded hunters and anglers in our country. And this is happening April 12th through the 14th in Boise, Idaho. Meeting people like Stephen Ranella, Remy Warren, Randy Newberg, Hank Shaw. Hank's one of the best wild game cooks in the world. And you'll be able to rub shoulders with hundreds of other public landowners and public land sportsmen. It's always been a really good time. Tickets are on sale now, and they cover all kind of activities there. You've got the Brew Fest, the Camp Chef Cook-Off. There's all kind of seminars. What's growing in popularity has been the headlining storytelling event. It's just really a good time. It's not to be missed. If this is the kind of lifestyle you lead, your tickets are now available at backcountryhunters.org. Hello, this is a Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. I'm Hal Herring, and I'm up here in Calloway, North Carolina. And I was corrected earlier. It's not quite the heart of the Smoky Mountains, although it looks like it to me. It's the heart of the old Cherokee Nation. And I'm with a historian and general kind of outdoorsman, roustabout wild man, Lamar Marshall. I met Lamar when he ran a trading post in Wren, Alabama, outside the Bankhead National Forest. In what was it, 20 years ago?
At least. I've been in this 25 years now, so
yeah,
about that.
Yeah, and so Lamar is, I'll let him tell you some of his story, but we're sitting here in this small house here in the mountains, surrounded by a lifetime of great books, everything from Ernest Thompson Seton up through Modern Homesteader, all through fur trapping, and a lifetime of good guns, and just a life on the land, really. Y'all kind of went from modern homesteader to conservation activist and back around and never left the fur trapping and the fishing and the hunting behind.
Now I'm going to pick that up again. Just now getting to the point, after 25 years of conservation work, where I've got time to actually fish and hunt and do the things I need to do. But since I'm living on Social Security now, what a great time to be living off of bear, deer, trout, which is my freezers are full of, and my wife and I grow most all of our vegetables, organic gardens, and I think we got it made up here.
I'm telling you, man, I was this morning I was lost looking for you, and I was so irritated. I've been on the road since December 20th or something like that, other than this long stop in Alabama, and I was like, I pulled up on top of one of these overlooks, and I thought, you know what you got to do right now is stop and look at you're in one of the most spectacular places in the whole world and take a look around. And one of the first things I noticed was our timber in Alabama is never going to compete with these trees growing in the Smoky Mountains that are 3 times as big and 3 times as tall as anything we could muster on that limestone of ours.
Yeah, and the fact is that these trees have all been cut and come back due to the U.S. Forest Service's efforts, of course, and the National Park Service that got everything going back. But the records that we've looked at in the area up here show that back in the early days before the first forests were cut, these trees were 3 times as big. They were spaced out so far apart in the mountains that grass grew 4 and 5 feet tall in the mountains. And, of course, animals grazed this stuff.
Sure.
So that sure would have been a time to have been able to walk the mountains.
It would. We were in a place in Paint Rock Valley, Alabama recently called Latham Cemetery. And the earliest graves in there are Confederate soldiers who are already of dying age, in the soldier. So 1840s. And the trees in that cemetery must be somewhat like the shagbark hickory, 3.5, 4 feet through, which I never see,
Absolutely.
Old red cedar, eastern red cedars, probably 3 feet through. Something like that may have been. So Lamar, we're going to talk about your project here, which is mapping the old Cherokee trail system. But let's talk about the old days and how you got here. And I know some of what you brought to this. You were fascinated with like primitive archery and all that stuff growing up. And you did a lot of trapping and hunting in Alabama, right?
I did. I grew up loving the forest, camping. My daddy took me camping when I was very small. So as I got a little bit older and began to read about these old-time trappers, by the time I was before a teenager, I began trapping possums and, the few animals that we had around then. And by the time I was 18 years old, I was really trapping. And by the time I was 20-something years old, I was trapping for a living, at least for 1 year I did, and loved the fur trade, loved everything about the woods and hunting, fishing. And about 1991, I moved into the Bankhead National Forest, and I thought, this is a paradise up here. This really was a paradise.
Tell us where that's at.
It's in North Alabama. It's in the southern part of the Cumberland Plateau, and there's probably 400 miles of canyons within 180,000 acres of national forest. And this was a incredible last remnant old forest in North Alabama. So I moved into this forest on a 100-acre in-holding, which meant I was basically surrounded by national forest. And I had horses, and I began to ride my horses out into the forest, and lo and behold, there were 40, 80, 100-acre clear cuts where they just mowed down all of these old trees across the hilltops, and they were replanting genetically superior loblolly pines.
Oh yeah, and I was talking to folks at Wild South on this trip. So one of the things I wanted, so that just for geographical, you were in Bluntsville.
I lived in Blount County, and I lived in Bluntsville at one time.
Yeah, and then a lot of this country's in Winston County, Alabama, right?
Yeah. And
people recognize Winston County because of the Free State of Winston. They seceded from the Confederacy during the Civil War, and this was a pocket of real old school resistance. And part of the reason they could do that was because they had all those canyons and those redoubts where you could get away. Yeah. So there's a long history in there, and I know you got into the Native American history in there too. But when you talk about these clear cuts, I want to make it really clear to how this was in that time, because I was a contractor with a little company of my own called Deep South Reforestation, and I planted those genetically improved loblolly pines for the various paper companies. We were based in Tuscaloosa, and I've said this before and written about this before, but if I have people ask me how I got interested in being a conservation writer, journalist, reporter, whatever, was what I witnessed in those days of the industrialization of really the takedown of a hardwood forest on an epic scale. My tree planting partner, and I would go through Birmingham, and there was a log yard off there. It was going on a railway, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, I would say hundreds acres of hardwoods sitting there, and they were going for a chip mill, I think. Was that right?
Yeah, there were chip mills in Mobile and different places, and of course up in Tennessee.
Yeah, and then those ships went on barges and went offshore.
Yeah.
But so you witnessed this too. That's what I'm trying to make sure. So then that was all on private land, and so then they brought that model and brought it to the Bankhead National Forest.
That's right, and I worked for 24 years in the engineering business, and our primary business was building pulp and paper mills, so I'm pretty familiar with that industry. And what we had here, though, was a situation where we had just 180,000 acres, very small forest, but it was one of the last remnants of old hardwood forests left in Alabama on public lands where people love to go hike and camp. And to me, that was the fact that we were going to cut this down and sell it and convert it to pines, which was unnatural in the first place, was when you think about the timber industry, this is competing. It's kind of like corporate welfare. You're cutting down public trees at a very low cost, and you're dumping them on the market. And if I was a tree farmer with, a tree farm, I would not, like that competition that they were doing.
Yep.
Unfair.
Well, So what? And so you had been there a while. How long when all this went down? This was 1991.
Yes, it didn't take but a few months to get out there and to find out that there was something going on here, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know there was a forest plan where they had actually divided 180,000 acres of public lands into little compartments, and every year they were going to cut down, say, 10% of all the compartments, so that if they cut 10, a little bit this year, a little bit next year, and a little bit next year, well, after 80 or 100 years, you're rotating, and then they go back and cut again.
Right. Was it, on that pulpwood is about a 25-year rotation in Alabama. If you can get all the hardwoods gone, which would be a 400-year rotation, you can get the loblollies in at a 25 to 30.
That's right.
And that's the plan. It's not exactly it's not exactly an ecological approach to forestry.
Well, a lot worse than that, though. The Forest Service, and I'm not condemning the Forest Service. We had some people there that were not very liked by the Forest Service at large. In fact, the regional office later on came out and changed what was going on in Alabama, but they actually flew helicopters over these old hardwood. Some of the beaches were 3 or 4 feet, in diameter.
Right.
Well, they wanted to get rid of these things, and they couldn't get rid of them fast enough.
That's the American beech tree.
Well, that and any tree.
Yeah.
If it wasn't a pine, then it was a trash tree.
Yeah.
And they had to get rid of it. Dogwoods, they cut down all the dogwoods. So they went with chainsaws and they girdled all the trees they could with the manpower they had, and they couldn't kill the trees fast enough. So they took helicopters and they mixed the prime component of Agent Orange, 2,4,5-T, in diesel fuel, and they flew over the forest and sprayed this stuff to kill the trees.
The hardwoods. Yeah.
One day, a cloud of this stuff blew over a neighboring farm outside the forest, and it mutated all of their crops, and they sued the Forest Service. But
Gotcha.
at that time, they didn't realize how dangerous that these dioxins were that they were spraying all over the forest, into the water, into the soils, and into people.
Yeah. And what? So thus the Bankhead Monitor was formed.
It was. I met a Native American descendant named Ricky Butch Walker and a doctor that lived in the forest. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, they got a forest plan that they're carrying out here, and they're going to, they're doing these things." So we raised up a band of it showed a Cherokee Indian descendants down there that were appalled at what was going on, primarily because there was a place called Indian Tomb Hollow in the forest, and it was sacred to these Indians. It was a native site.
Yeah.
The Forest Service illegally sold 40 acres out of it, had no archaeological surveys done, and they clear cut it, destroyed it, and looters went in and dug up graves and just laid the Indian skulls on the shelves of the bluffs and outraged the natives. So we formed a grassroots group that began to take on the Forest Service.
And that was in the early 90s?
That was 1991.
Yeah.
The fall of 1991, and in 92, 93, 94, things really started cranking.
Yeah.
And I joined the Sierra Club. I went everywhere I could go to show people what was going on. I photographed. I gave speeches. I joined with the Southern Appalachian Forest Coalition. And pretty soon I was getting interns sent down to Alabama. Fred Standback, one of the greatest conservationists in the country, who has bought up tens of thousands of acres of lands and turned it over to the public, began to fund us, and we began to grow stronger.
Yeah. And did the Forest Service listen to you?
No. In fact, when I would go to the forest and try to hand out my little pamphlets, well, they tried to arrest me.
Yeah.
It was illegal to do that.
Yeah.
And one day, the ranger that was there, who hated me because I drew cartoons of him that with a disclaimer that said any resemblance to living people is an absolute coincidence, but it looked like old fat dumpy ranger that he was. And so he said, "I want you to come down to my office. I want to talk to you." And this after about 2 years, and I said, "Oh, great, they're finally coming around."
Yeah.
I went down to this ranger's office, public, the federal building, and everybody was gone. And he got me in his office, closed his door, and rolled his chair around right in my face and said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Some of my men have wanted to come after you." And he said, Frank, I've had to restrain my men." And I jumped up and I said, "My God," I said, if your men want to come after me, he said, come on, I got a gun, I'd be glad to, But he said, well, I didn't mean violence. I just mean they want me to sue you. They want me to sue you.
Yeah.
But they were nasty.
Yeah.
And when the Indians met with him very shortly afterwards, now this is a band of children Cherokees, the ranger said, I don't know what y'all are upset about. You got toilet paper and a good road in the Indian home. And that was it. That did it right there. It was war.
Yeah, they were furious. What was the outcome of that?
After years, about 1996, the Forest Service continued to destroy archaeological sites, the Hightown Path, which was an Indian trail, the Kinloch Rock Shelter, kept cutting, and we had a protest. And the American Indian movement came in from the Northwest, and Indians came from all over to Oakville, Alabama. And at the same time, we notified the regional forest office, and they sent 2 men over from Atlanta. And they sat for 3 or 4 hours listening to these native people get up and condemn the Forest Service for destroying the cultural resources.
Yeah.
And immediately, these forest rangers said, they're violating the law down here. They're not doing archaeological surveys. And they slapped a moratorium on any ground-disturbing activities for about 18,000 acres of cultural sites, and that was the beginning of the end of those practices.
Gotcha. Those practices being that, like the wholesale logging and the spraying?
Well, they reduced the size of clear cuts, and then the Forest Service began to work on, okay, we've cut all this down and converted it to pines. How can we restore it?
Yeah.
So restoration became the next big word, which is great. All for that, gradually thin out these pines and allow the hardwoods to come back. So they supposedly embarked on this.
Is that still going on?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's been some setbacks. There's still been some abuse.
Yeah.
Because anytime, there's you send in people that are supposed to do this, they might cheat a little here and there. But basically, I'd say that the Forest Service is doing a good job everywhere today.
Yeah, and that Bankhead monitor was citizens monitoring the Bankhead National Forest, right?
Right. And it became Wild Alabama, and we began monitoring the Talladega National Forest and the Conecuh National Forest.
Right.
Then it became Wild South. We began monitoring other states. So it grew into a regional organization and effort.
Yeah, and I know Janice Barrett had said we're deeply, this is at Wild South. She said we're deeply involved with the Forest Service now. We work with them, we volunteer with them, and we watch them. This is what it means to be a citizen and having the world run by the people who show up.
Right.
When we speak about this, I know you're right here on the edge of the Nantahala National Forest now, right?
Exactly.
And then I came through the what's the one to the south?
Cherokee.
The Cherokee.
I came through the Cherokee. Tennessee.
Yeah, and that's the Ocoee River and all that.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the Nantahala, does it butt up to the Great Smoky Mountains Park?
Yes. They all connect. The Cherokee National Forest and the Nantahala connect in the Unicoi Mountains because that's the state line between Tennessee and North Carolina, which is the dividing ridge.
Okay. And is that all pretty much roadless?
No, it's not all roadless. There are certain wilderness areas and certain wilderness study areas that are roadless, but there are a lot of logging roads.
Gotcha. And it's a lot of there's a lot of people hunting. I mean, we ran into the store, we ran into your bear hunting buddies, and I noticed. I thought it was their truck, but it was another truck already pulled up with bear dog plot hounds in the back, and I mean, this is as hunting and fishing a culture as I've ever been in. I mean, I can see why you relocated to here, for sure.
Yeah, it's great. It's great here, and there's still some of the hardcore environmentalists. They oppose any and all types of cutting of wood of any kind of the mountains. But actually, there needs to be some cutting. There needs to be some openings for wildlife.
Sure.
And
well, I love hardwoods. I mean, that's part of what I grew up doing is cutting some timber. And I love timber itself, like wood, lumber. And so I've never been an extremist on logging. I just didn't want them to cut it all down and leave me with a mud patch falling in the river.
Well, there's in my mind, if you got these national forests and you can grow. Now, on private land, you can't do this because the trees are cut at a lot shorter rotations.
Right.
They don't get that old. On national forests, you have the opportunity to grow older stands of trees, big cherry, like a cherry oaks and things
Yeah.
that make great furniture. Why not
Yeah.
grow these huge, beautiful, valuable trees and then selectively cut those out and use them in the timber industry for building
Right.
things?
Right.
Some firewood can come out, and that way you.
Right.
They're doing this out in the Ozarks. There's a pioneer forest out there where they are managing it and using great techniques, and you
Yeah.
can't tell it's even been logged.
Yeah. Well, one of the things when I was looking at coming to talk to you, and I was remembering all the kind of the bad old days there on the Bankhead where it was so contentious, and I wanted to get your opinion, like on. I mean, you have gravitated your whole life to the national forest and to the public lands as your primary, hunting and fishing ground, or like that's where you wanted to live. Myself too. I've raised my entire family in Montana because of access to primarily the Lewis and Clark National Forest, and all of those other public lands. So have you ever? What's your change? What's your as a Southerner, like? What do you see I mean, we're in a death struggle now just to keep the idea of public lands, especially in the West. It's like the privatization of public lands movement is galloping forward. What's your take on that, having been in as a public lands user in the South your whole life?
I'm also a public lands user in the West when I can get out there
Right,
and hike across
right.
the Rockies and different places. I don't believe we need to surrender not 1 square inch of public land anywhere because it's too valuable it belongs to the public. It doesn't belong to the corporations. And what's driving this is corporate lobbying and money that wants to open these lands up for development and building because they're going to make a buck off of it.
Yeah.
And then the land's going to be developed. If there were no national forest where I live right here, every mountaintop would have big homes built all over it, and it would be disastrous. It'd be nothing left. The public lands represent the last great wild, natural, native places of North America. It represents the ancestral landscapes of the indigenous peoples that were here. To be able to walk down a Cherokee trail in these mountains that is deeply, embedded in the ground.
Yeah, I was looking at your pictures. You bet.
And to see that you're walking in that trail, you're looking at the exact ridges, the exact scenes that they were seeing at that time. And to be able to walk through the original old growth trees that existed then, it does something to you.
Yeah.
Connects you to your past, it connects you to your roots, it connects you to the land, and you can't put a price on our cultural heritage.
Yeah. And I know you and I share too, like it's in just a love of, I mean, we're kind of outliers, I guess. I've lived out my life that way, and this is like the last bastion, the power of freedom to me, the real power of freedom. And I don't find it where I don't have public lands to access, and I want it for other people too, because I feel like it's an essential energy of our nation.
Our children,
Yeah.
our grandchildren, what are they going to have? I mean, if we dispose of the last public lands, the world's population is not going to get any smaller. It's getting bigger and bigger.
Right. So, and I know I don't want to get too into this, put you on the spot or not, but I know you're a man of like deep religious faith as well. And did that play in any of this? Like when you started these, how does this is leading me to another question about the South that I'm still pondering. But you've been a church going man, obviously, for a long time, if not all the time.
I teach the Word of God today.
Yeah.
And I've spent 25 years beginning with being hanging out with people in the Earth First that were really opposed to any concept of God, and creation and man being superior or above animals. And
they were opposed to meat eating too, though. It was a full scale opposition.
It was awful. They were like, don't kill anything. Don't kill a squirrel. Don't kill anything. A rat is equal to a pig, is equal to a goat, is equal to a child. Well, that is a horrible logic in my mind.
Gotcha.
I believe that God created the earth to be inhabited. I believe that we're good stewards of the earth, and if you love the creation, you're gonna take care of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we can't cut trees for firewood and to use. We do it sustainably, and we don't exceed the carrying capacity of the land. That's the real challenge right there.
Yeah. And I was asking you earlier this morning. I was, I look at your dogs, and you got the Jack Russell Terriers, and we got, all of us, and I've got my dog here, my hunting dogs. It's all hunting dogs and stuff. And I have driven to South this year, and I was telling you this story. I was 12 degrees above, and these guys were out crappie fishing under the bridge going to Scottsboro, Alabama. I get to Scottsboro, and there's boats coming in. One of them had 4 guys and a load of decoys in it with a 1/4 inch of freeboard. This is 12, 15, maybe it's up to 17 degrees now, right? And they're heading in from duck hunting. Every turnout along, there's some state land down there, and probably some TVA land. They're hunting, they're deer hunting, they're duck hunting, they're fishing. In my world, my view, the South, the United States South, should be the greatest power for conservation and environmental protection in the world, given the number of people who love hunting and fishing. But in your experience in the Sipsey Bankhead National Forest, Sipsey Wilderness debate and whatnot, we don't have that power. We don't use that power if we have it. What do you have any wisdom as to why we as Southerners are not the leaders in conservation thought, even though this is what we love the most of all?
Generations of children that were not taught principles of conservation. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
They weren't taught that. It's like people throw litter out on the ground. They don't have any they don't respect it.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 1930s in Alabama, during the Great Depression, people had to live off the land. They trapped out the beaver population went down to less than, I think, 500.
Right.
And there were no conservation laws. Without these laws, that brought the beaver back,
right,
there would be no beaver. So we got to have regulations. But as far as instilling the love for the land and the water, I don't know why they don't understand that we all have a right to breathe clean air, to swim in clean water, and to have healthy forests to live in. It's a healthier life, but they're ignorant. That's the only thing I can say is people are just ignorant of that.
They're ignorant of that because some of the people I know who do the hunting and fishing are not ignorant people at all.
No.
They're completely educated people, it's been a mystery to me why, where I live in Montana, people are still accept ideas of conservation. That when you go to South Alabama, people say, well, we don't need the Clean Water Act. And these are fishermen. Or the Clean Water Act infringes on private property rights too much, and we got to get rid of it. And you say, well, where would that lead for your fishing? And these are hardcore fishermen.
Well, corporate power.
Is it a disconnect?
This corporate brainwashing. There's a book called Manufactured Consent that everybody ought to read, and it describes how that.
Tell me what it is.
Manufactured consent.
Okay.
And it describes how that, say back in the 1920s or so, or no women in America didn't smoke. Well, they got men to smoking. All the men smoked. Right. Clark Gable, everybody got a cigarette in their hand. Well,
everybody was cool.
The industry says that we can double our sales if we can get women to smoke. So they started glamorizing women smoking on movies, and then the women started smoking. They changed people's minds. And so the corporate, this corporate propaganda that's come out for so many years saying, this little bit of pollution is not going to hurt you in the water, and it's going to kill jobs, of course.
If you clean it up.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So they've brainwashed people is what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never seen the a truly well explained deal, a true explanation of economy versus ecological health, because once ecological health is destroyed, the ecosystem services cost more than whatever the economic benefits are of destroying it, I guess, unless you're talking about extraordinary short term, like right now.
Right.
You're out. I know you worked in conservation for 25 years, and you're glad to be on your own now. I mean, I know that was a contentious lot of years.
It was. It was a takes its toll when you spend all your time traveling around the southeast to meetings. Meeting after meeting after meeting. The Department of Environmental Managements. The U.S. Forest Service meetings, and we did a lot of other things. We sued TVA over TVA on the lakes in North Alabama, this side of Gunnersville.
Yeah.
They were at night. They would turn on their pollution stuff, start pumping out all this stuff into the air where you couldn't see it at night. And so the Alabama Environmental Council, and I was one of the plaintiffs, brought a lawsuit against them. And I've canoed up there, around that area, and they deposed me in the lawsuit. They said, "Mr. Marshall, have you ever seen any smoke coming out of the stacks up here at this power plant?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "One day my wife and I canoed around a bend in the Tennessee River, and there it was, like the nostrils of Satan, bellowing out the smoke." And this guy got really mad. I mean, he jumped up and down and said I made a joke out of it, but I wasn't joking. I mean,
right, sure. You were using metaphor.
Hey, I enjoyed suing my enemies.
Yeah.
Our motto was, sue them all and let God sort them out.
Yeah, yeah.
Litigation is our business, and business is good.
And it was at that time, right?
At that time, yeah. And that changed over the years.
Yeah. And what do you have a relationship with, with the U.S. Forest Service in those years? Did it get better? Was it positive?
It got better.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, after the Indian Tomb fiasco and then the great Oakville protest, Forest Service got rid of the rangers in Alabama, the forest supervisor of Alabama, and they replaced them with good personnel.
Yeah.
It was mainly an old school. People in the old school, they have to be this is not the old days anymore.
Yeah.
And so they got better. And
even in the old days, I think what push came to shove was what I witnessed, where we just liquidated those private land forests, in South Alabama. Mm-hmm. I mean, my story is I'd go off and try to hunt some. Our tree planting is done in the winter, and we were tree planters. We were part of the problem, but my partner and I'd walk down. I had a cur dog then, and we'd go and hunt these hollers in between the huge clear cuts. And the clear cuts were, we would bid on them according to roll, burn, chopped, where they had been and sprayed. And so the cleaner the ground, the better the planting, right? So you're looking for that kind of chopped, burned, rolled, and sprayed.
Mm-hmm. And roller
drums with huge, earth disturbing knobs on it, which breaks up the slash from the clear cut. A lot of them had been burned, and anyway, it wasn't pretty, and it was huge. But we would drop into these kind of ravines, in between that had never been cut, and it was like dropping into Eden. You pass through. I remember digging up a 5-gallon bucket of bloodroot from the middle of this clear cut that was about to be sprayed, and moving it to my mother and father's place in North Alabama, where it still is. But it was the last time that this bloodroot would ever see life. It was the last week of its existence before it was sprayed and then converted over to loblolly pine. And what must have been lost in that forest was extraordinary. And so when that went from the private lands to the public lands is when really things started blowing up.
Dr. E.O. Wilson came down to Alabama, and he called us the thin green line down here. But we asked him about the conversion.
E.O. Wilson's from Alabama.
Yeah.
Yep.
We asked him about the effects of this mass conversion from the native forest to these tree farms, industrial tree farms.
Yeah.
He said they've lost 90% of their biodiversity.
Yeah.
And a lot of these places where they have cut these hillsides where salamanders were very abundant. Salamanders are very important to the ecosystem.
And some of the rarest ones in the world are in Alabama. I know E.O. Wilson's done a lot with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it said that they can't. The salamanders won't make a comeback for 300 years. Sometimes, it could be at least 100 years to 300 years before they can ever recover enough to. But it would never be the same, because we hired 2 scientists from NASA to come in our forest. We paid them well and they were a soil scientist and a hydrologist, and they came in and they said, okay, in the old days, all these hills in the virgin forest, the earth was, I don't know, X number of feet thick, and it was like a sponge. And he said when it rained in the wintertime, all the water stores up in this great sponge. All summer, it seeps out, and you got these springs. And that's the reason we don't see this anymore. But he said when they clear cut these ridges, all that sponge washed off, million years of, or thousands of years of accumulation. And he said every time it rains now, it's like flushing a toilet. Mm-hmm. He said the water just rushes off down there. It washes it's bad for the streams. It washes the banks out. It's just bad. It was a very bad way to do things.
Right.
Selectively cutting would have been much more responsible.
Sure. And when I was with Wild South recently, we pointed out that the headwaters of the Sipsey River, which is dammed up to form Smith Lake, the cleanest lake in Alabama, the headwaters are contained within the land that y'all helped save in there.
That's right. That's where it all begins right there, is in the headwaters.
Yeah. There's
thousands of springs that come together to make little, creeks, and then bigger creeks, and then the rivers.
Yeah. Well, since this is a public lands broadcast we're doing, there would have been no way to do what y'all did. And yes, it was contentious, and I know there was real trouble that you had at times, right?
Yeah, they're just going to kill me and lynch me. It wasn't anything
really
serious.
But these were people who had a misguided view of what y'all were trying. They had a misguided idea of what y'all were trying to do. Yeah.
They did.
And I remember those times, and I followed that. I had met you before that, but I followed that, and I was sorry that it ever came to that, because actually the fighting there was actually between what should be natural allies.
That's right, exactly right. But we were allies up to the point where we wanted to have this. Well, number one, they were mining. They were actually trading the national forest to the mining companies and strip mining them in Winston County.
Right.
So that was one issue. Then
there were land trades there.
There were land trades, and there were land trades all over the forest. That was the two issues: conversion of the forest, clear cutting, and then the mining. And
that was coal mining, right?
I was good friends with a lot of the loggers early on, because they said when we grew up, our granddaddies took horses in there and we cut, and he said, "Well, we go in there and log." He said, "We didn't clear cut." He said, "We selectively cut, and you couldn't, 5 years later, you can't tell it was even done."
Yeah.
That's the way it should be done.
Yeah.
But when we began to try to get permanent protection for the whole forest and have it off limit, have no logging, very little logging done, just the restoration and wildlife openings, some groups that were national in scope. There were we call them private property rights. I call them right-wing nuts.
Right.
And they came in and they held meetings, and they told the people and lied to the people that lived in the area and said, black helicopters going to come flying over, and the United Nations is going to control this national forest. They're going to take your land away from you and run you out of the mountains. They're going to dig up cemeteries of your beloved ones. They're going to repopulate this forest with a wild beast, like wolves and cougars and things. Next thing you knew, there were conspiracy theories that said that they were going to shut down the interstate from Talladega National Forest to Tennessee, and from Birmingham to North Alabama. The interstate's going to be closed down. Now, it was just crazy.
Yeah. And when was this? Early 90s?
Yeah, that was the early 90s.
Yeah.
It was about 94. It was Clinton was
still. Was Clinton.
It was when.
Yeah. Right.
At the end of Clinton's presidency.
Sure. Well, I remember, and I was living in the West during the Clinton presidency, and there was no theory too outlandish to be accepted by people that I knew, that I worked with and stuff. Did you know that? And then, boy, you'd ready. You go, oh man, lunch is over. I'm gone.
Well, listen, they painted up signs out. Recreation areas. They went down, sprayed, die Lamar, die, kill Lamar, lynch him, and they were threatened to burn down my store.
Yeah.
And it was awful, the lies that were told about us. And all we wanted to do was stop the strip mining and stop the conversion of our natural native hardwoods to genetically superior loblollies.
Right. I hear you. Well, and I guess, like I said, I started on this, but as this is a public lands broadcast, had there not been the Bankhead National Forest, there would have been it would have just been conversion and strip mining. The people would have never had a voice.
Yeah, we would certainly raise the awareness, because every time we turned around, we made the headlines, and the Forest Service always came out with a bad end of the deal, no matter what. They would come out and they'd have one headline so on the front page of the Birmingham News or Decatur Daily.
Yeah.
And then the next week we went back to, with another story, and I think one of the headlines was, Donald Armstrong, a resident within the forest, said not even the dead are safe from the Forest Service because they cut down trees that fell over his son's grave.
Yeah, right.
So,
wow.
It was
I have had really good luck in the last few years as a public lands. I'm working on public lands as a contractor in forestry and stuff, and I think that I don't know how the Forest Service is there. But I think with the Sipsey Wilderness well established and all of that in place, is relationship between Wild South and the Forest Service good?
I think they're very good. They've been collaborating now for several years.
Yeah.
They, like I said, they got some good rangers down there
and they rebuilt the model. So
and they, instead of fighting against, we collaborated. They had meetings where we came to the table. We were part of the equation.
You bet.
And because that, I advocated protecting getting a canyon prescription, because these canyons are riparian and a unique type of an ecosystem, and because of the cultural heritage aspects, where the region adapted cultural heritage prescriptions, and they came up with good management prescriptions that will change a lot of management all over the Southeast.
Gotcha.
And in North Carolina, they do a great job up here. In fact, work very close with the Forest Service here, because I have they're revising our forest plan here.
Yeah.
And I have mapped and included 150 miles of Cherokee trails that cross the Nantahala National Forest. And the law mandates that they protect any historical or archaeological site.
Okay.
And they'll study them, of course. But they were very. They work with the tribes up here, and they were very. Asked me, please show us where these trails are. Map these trails, and let's get them in. Wow.
So man, I'm glad we got here in this right now, because this is what I wanted. One reason I wanted to come talk to you was give me a short rundown on what your project has been.
When I left Alabama and moved up here in North Carolina, and quit being the leader of strategy of doing the things we're doing down there, I decided cultural heritage work is more what I really enjoy, preserving our cultural heritage, native sites, and especially trails, old ancient historic trails. So when I moved to North Carolina, I went to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, went to their Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and I'd already worked with the Trail of Tears Association in Alabama, mapping the binge detachment across North Alabama.
Tell me what that is.
With the binge detachment, it was a Cherokee removal route, 1838, where they took I forgot how many Cherokees, 800 or 900 Cherokees from Fort Payne, North Alabama, through Pulaski, Tennessee, and out west. And I found old surveys and maps, and I replotted the route that they took the Cherokees on the wagons.
Okay.
So I moved up here, and I went to the Eastern Band and said, has anybody ever mapped the Cherokee trail system at large across these mountains in western North Carolina? And they said, no, there's no work ever been done on that. And so we made a proposal. I got a grant, and we began to go to the National Archives, to the state archives, and gather surveys and historic maps, and then to reconstruct these old trails in the corridors where they would have occurred across the mountains. Now, a lot of them are under paved roads, today, because naturally they were in you're either on top of a hill here or you're down running along a creek. Well,
right, I'm getting into that. I'm finding that out. Yeah.
They like to go along the creeks. So I began to reconstruct all this, and then we began to go to the field, and the places, and this is back to the public lands. Private lands, they've pretty well, wiped everything out. But you get on the public lands in the National Forest, where the remnants of these old Cherokee trails still exist in many cases. They still run along the same route. Sometimes the early settlers would widen them for wagons and maybe put switchbacks in them over the mountains. But the trails were evolved from buffalo were in these mountains. The buffalo crossed the mountains. They made trails. The Cherokees followed the buffalo trails.
Yeah.
So the system evolved, and basically you'd follow a long flat valley. The trail might get up on a dividing ridge and follow a ridge top because you don't have to cross streams,
right,
in a long way. They went through the lowest gaps in the mountains, passes, saddles, and gaps. Naturally, I mean, if you looked at the mountain, you wouldn't go over Kligman's Dome when you could go over here and go through Indian Gap.
Gotcha. Okay.
And they would cross the rivers at the natural fords, the shallow places. So
yeah.
There's kind of a system.
Well, I've seen the map, and you use really old sources. I was looking at your military map up there upstairs.
Right.
And those are really old archival sources that you hunted up, right?
Right. The maps from the historic maps from 1500, 1600, 1700. They're very general. They may show 2 Cherokee towns or any other native towns with a line connecting them. Well, we know there was a trail that went through these 2 places here. Well, as the maps got better, and up to the time, I'd say by 1838, we already had the Corps of Topographical Engineers.
Uh-huh.
So the Army began to get really good at mapping and surveying. So they had survey teams came in and actually mapped this. And not only the maps you saw, which covered a good portion of western North Carolina, but they had field books. There were like 10 field books that detail you go north 22 degrees east, 1,200 feet, point.
Yeah.
You turn this way, and then you cross, War Woman Creek at this point. So you're being able to, you can reconstruct these trails. And the military journals of 1761, in the French and Indian War and the British invasion that happened here then, and then later 1776, there were military journals that were detailed daily.
Yeah.
We went 12 miles. We crossed this creek here. We crossed that creek there. We went by this mountain here, and we camped here. And you can actually put these things on maps.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done. I've reconstructed 1,000 miles of Cherokee trails that crisscross the mountains. And this was just part of a continental-wide trail system that extends from here all the way to the Pacific.
Right.
Atlantic to the Pacific, Hudson Bay to the Gulf of Mexico. The Native America was not some, just a giant wilderness where a squirrel could get in the trees on the one coast, and travel across the top. No, it was managed.
Well, one of the most incredible maps that we looked at up there to me was you were talking about so many things in the Cherokee, culture are in 4, like the buffalo or the bison, the white-tailed deer, the black bear, and what's the
elk?
And the elk,
elk.
right?
Yeah, from big to small. The bison were they extended from let's say the Gulf of Mexico through southern Alabama, Louisiana, southern Georgia, and through the Carolinas. And there's numerous records and chronicles of where the buffalo were and how they were hunted and how they retreated back into the mountains as the settlements moved in, and then eventually they were extirpated.
Yeah.
But only after a couple of 100 years of hunting. And so they had the buffalo, then they had the elk, which also became extirpated, basically, and reintroduced now into the Smokies.
Right.
And then, of course, when I grew up, it was like, the Indians lived off of bear, deer, and turkey. Well, they did, but that was after the big game was gone.
Right. Well, so do you know what years, like all those accounts you were using of the buffalo hunters, or not the buffalo hunters, but of the Native Americans hunting buffalo? Was that mostly like 18th century?
Yeah, but what it is, I talk about all my work. I try to begin with the historical period, which is about 1680 is when they began to write down. The settlers came in, Virginia, North Carolina, settled the coast, the eastern seaboard, and that's when things started written down. So I accumulate all the journals and things that I could get at that time. And by 1710, there were some great journals of travelers that traveled through the southeast, and they killed buffalo. The Indians killed buffalo at clay pits, which were licks, really.
Yeah.
Kentucky and Tennessee were really good because Kentucky is full of salt springs, licks. Have you heard of the lick?
Yep.
Blue Lick. They had thousands of licks up there. Well, it was salty places, and the animals would congregate there and get the mineral water.
Yeah.
So, and also the Indians would had salt pans, and they would build fires, and they would evaporate the salt spring water into salt, which was a commodity, and it was put into cakes, and they traded this.
I'll bet, right.
All over.
Wow.
Huge trade system going on between the Indians from, say the Gulf all the way up to the Great Lakes.
Yeah. And I noticed on that map it called it the Barrens, and then another was the Savannas, which is all. Yeah. We don't associate any of that country with grasslands now.
They're trying to restore a lot of it.
Yeah.
Now, because a savanna was a grassy plain with clumps of trees scattered out.
Okay.
And then the barrens were more like where there wasn't any trees at all.
Yeah.
But the Indians burnt this every year. And
yeah.
The early accounts of the pioneers and surveying teams going through said that the whole sky was black where the Indians did their annual burning.
Gotcha.
They burnt those grasses, which made them spring back up into very rich buffalo pasture, elk pasture.
And then did they burn for chestnuts too, right, to pick up chestnuts?
They might have some. I don't know that. I didn't find any records on that. But every third tree in the mountains where I live here was chestnuts.
Yeah.
And when the chestnut trees died out, about 30% of our mass crop disappeared, which tells you that, biologists, that, hey, there were a lot more bear, there were a lot more turkey, there were a lot more animals that depended on these chestnuts.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, you had these sparsely spaced trees with a lot of herbage and grazing going on.
Yeah.
And another thing that was interesting to me was the cane, river cane. Well, I never knew that river cane was like the number one top natural herbage that animals love.
Gotcha.
I mean, when I read the early journals, the travelers would travel over the mountains, and they would always camp at the first cane, and they would turn the horses loose out there to graze.
Wow. No, I didn't know that either. I knew switch cane, which has become rarer in my life. Everything would eat that. But once it's mature, it doesn't seem like they could eat it. I mean,
well, they eat the leaves off of it.
Yeah,
they eat the young shoots. And
right.
The settlers, when they came in, of course, they drained some of the swampy areas, but they free range their cows and pigs, and they destroyed a lot, thousands and thousands of acres of natural river cane.
Right. Is there river cane still around?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're still around, and the Eastern Band is actually restoring
river
cane.
This being the Eastern Band of Cherokee.
Yes, up
gotcha.
here around Cherokee, North Carolina, and Bryson City, and in that area. They have about a 50,000-acre tract called Qualla Boundary. Great place to go visit because they have a museum that'll take you hours to go through. It's showing you all the way from Paleo to the Archaic to the Mississippian to the Woodland, all the way through the time periods.
Wow.
And then, of course, you got access to the Smoky Mountains right there, too.
Right.
If you like to be a tourist, you can go to Gatlinburg.
Right.
If you like to get out into the woods, head to the mountains.
There's quite a bit of it, yeah. The one experience I had in there was, we used to climb at Looking Glass up by Brevard.
I've been there.
And
that was on top, laid out there on the rock myself.
Yeah, and of thunderstorms in my life, the most dramatic thunderstorms I've ever experienced are right there.
I wouldn't want to be up there with one.
No doubt. I mean, it's like it's like being inside of a bomb, But that and then Shining Rock Wilderness.
Call those plutons.
What's that?
Those rock out there, big bald rocks that the volcanic activity pushed those up out of the ground, and they're when you see them from the air, they're very unique.
Yeah.
Very strange looking.
There's one called John Rock right across there. There's a fish hatchery in there. That's the Davidson River.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Indian Trail followed the Davidson River. That was one of the main routes that crossed through the mountains in that area.
Wow. So you must have spent thousands of hours outside.
Spent about 8 years walking these mountains up here, and one of the trails went from modern Gatlinburg to Cherokee, North Carolina, and it was called Indian Gap Trail. There was a gap near Newfound Gap.
Yeah.
So I said, well, we need to go map this trail. In 1820, they turnpiked it, so it was a wagon road back then. And I got an intern, and we went to the top of the mountains and just took off with our little backpacks and dropped off the mountain, and it was so steep we were hanging on to saplings, just trying to get down the mountainside without breaking our neck. Finally got down about 1,000 feet, and we found the old trail bed, which was totally encroached by rhododendron and mountain laurel, so thick that you had to crawl and trying to GPS it now, and stinging laurel. And We're down on our bellies one day, and all of a sudden we crawl up on a steaming pile of black bear scat. And my intern said, "What are we gonna do if we get on a bear?" And I said, "Oh, well, I don't know. We're gonna be able to run, are we?"
Yeah, and you can't run, and you're on your belly. Yeah,
and not like Ronald Reagan said, I'm gonna, you're taking your tennis shoes off. And the guy says, "What are you doing, taking your shoes off? You can't outrun that bear." And he said, "I ain't got to outrun the bear. Just got to outrun you."
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite old jokes.
Did he? In all of that, did you see did you find any great hunting spots?
Oh yeah. You find lots of great hunting spots because you cross all the game trails and and you see the spoor and great hunting spots. But a lot of the national park, there's no hunting allowed on that
right.
part. But we didn't do a lot up there. Most of it was on the Nantahala-Pisgah National Forest.
Gotcha.
And Cherokee.
Yeah. And so, how far are we from Asheville here, or that Shining Rock? Say
72 miles from Asheville. Shining Rock's about half that distance. It's just it's over the Balsam Mountains here.
Okay.
It's about 30 miles.
Gotcha.
Another great place.
That's big country. So I know for lunch we just finished up your bear. Bear stew.
I got plenty more in the freezer.
Yeah. And I won't make you tell that story. The guy at the store said it was he put you on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They do. We all got a whole bunch of bear hunters here, and each person can get we get a chance to kill one bear.
Yeah.
That's all you get. And so I don't have any dogs, so my neighbors got the dogs. Well, they treed the bear and
is
said,
that
hey, we got the bear.
Is that a wild hunt?
Yeah. Oh
yeah.
Oh yeah. The way they hunt, I'm not a big fan of dog hunting. I never have been.
Right.
This is a tradition that's been going on for a long time.
Boy, is it?
It's a sacred tradition of the mountain people, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
They go they train their dogs. Well, they go to the top of the mountains, and they'll. I've been there. I've been on lots of bear hunts.
Yeah.
And it ain't easy.
Yeah.
You're not out there sitting on a tailgate shooting a bear.
Yeah.
You're up in the woods trying to dodge limbs, and the dogs are dragging you up under rhododendron, and you're climbing up the steepest mountains, and you're panning and stumbling.
And these are plot hounds mostly, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll get up there and maybe get on a old Forest Service road in the mountains, and you'll go down that road until the dogs find a track. They said, "We found a track," and they're hunters constantly looking for a place where a bear came off of the side of the hill, across the road, maybe in the snow, maybe not. And when they find a track, man, the dogs go wild, and then they start releasing one dog, the next dog, and then the dogs take off and they go down the mountain. So it's a chase.
Yeah.
It's a chase. That's what they call it, a chase.
You bet.
And they got radios. They'll be like, come in, Bo, come in. And they'll say, yeah, come in. Now this guy down at the bottom of the mountains and one on the top of the mountains. Just say, can you hear the dogs down there? Yeah, wait a minute, they're gone. I think they done wrapped around into a different watershed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like they got a whole lingo. And
yeah.
And eventually, if they tree the bear, you still got to use a GPS. The dogs have got GPS collars on. Okay, you got to climb in the mountains, find that bear in a tree, shoot the bear. Then it's got to be drug out.
Right.
And I used to be the one, be like, they kill the bear, then, all right, Lamar, you go up there with land, y'all drag that bear out of here. And I was like, oh,
bring your drag rope.
I'm 69 years old. I'm getting too old to drag bears out of the mountains.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I know your buddy there was talking about it, and they pretty much fish and hunt all the time. That's what it sounded like.
All the time.
And y'all are on the Little Tennessee River here.
Yes. Pristine. One of the cleanest.
It is incredible. It's almost frozen today, but it is so beautiful.
Yeah, and you can canoe it, you can swim, you can fish. It's beautiful.
It's a smallmouth fishery.
Yeah, smallmouth.
Yeah.
They're pretty well native there, but I'm not sure if they stock anything in the main river. They all the trout streams around here get stocked.
Yeah.
So there's good trout fishing around here.
And is there turkey hunting in the forest here?
Oh my gosh, they killed turkey hunting. When bear
See,
season
I'm familiar with some of it, but not this. I don't know this.
When bear season comes in, they're bear hunting. I mean, I'll be up there trying to work on my Indian trails, and I get a phone call, and Randy will say, "What are you doing?" I'm working. Well, you get your skinning knife and get on down here. We got one hanging. Now I'll have to jump up what I'm doing, go down and help skin a bear or a deer. So the bear season will go out, and then the deer season starts up. So then they're running deer. And then the bear season comes back in. And then not long after the bear season goes out, turkey season comes in.
Comes back.
Yeah. And then
or comes in spring turkey.
Yeah.
Right, I got you.
And when the turkey season goes out, well, then the trout are running.
Right.
And then by the time, a little later, well, it's time to plant your crops. So,
Right.
Randy's he truck farms.
Yeah.
And so he grows stuff in the winter. Then he hunts ginseng in the fall. I mean, he got it made.
Yeah.
This is the kind of life that I love.
Yeah. Yeah. When y'all got pretty good gardening and whatnot, I mean, you're set up. I just remember when I met you at the store, you were like in the modern homestead, like you were gardening, you were working a subsistence life, and that's what it looks like. Y'all have got that put back together here.
Oh, I've never quit doing this. No matter where I live, I've always had organic gardens.
Yeah.
And for 5 years, when I lived in North Alabama, I lived on a homestead, 20-acre homestead in the woods. Had no electricity for 5 years. Had a hand pump for water. We raised. I even raised wheat one year, and then used my scythe and cut it down.
Yeah.
And threshed it and did it. I used to do everything by hand. And it's like, you know what? $10, I can get electricity and I can pump my water.
Yeah.
And over the time now, I'm like, you know what? Hey, we got technology. Even though we don't want to become a slave to it,
Yeah.
why not use it to our benefit? And I've used technology greatly here lately on mapping, using GIS to map Indian trails,
Yeah.
Google Earth, and my computers and programs and Photoshop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's fun.
Well, for people listening, where do you find that project? Or if you've got a website online with the Cherokee Trails mapping?
Yes, and I'm at the point now with this project where we're just completing it.
Okay.
And the Cherokee actually going to own this site, and it's going to be on their Cherokee website.
Okay.
It's going to be they're called story maps, GIS or online GIS story maps. Now you can get the link though off of my website, which is www.southeastheritage.com.
Okay.
That's my little what I call my cultural heritage resource.
Yeah.
Organization is Southeast Heritage, and that's the website.
Okay, so one of the things, and we got time to talk about any of this, but what I've been most struck with here, and I'm a writer and I'm a reader, and it's funny. I did a podcast with an old friend of mine who's a firearms instructor, and he's got the best library on the use of firearms, hunting, war, ballistics, whatever, self-defense. It's a beautiful thing to sit there and have access to this entire world of knowledge, And in this house, you've gotten some of that going on with everything, like I said, from homesteading on through. But would you have a recommendation as to historical books that you found? I know you put me on to Walker. Tell me which.
And what subject you mainly?
Well, that was just the Indian history of this part of the world, or the early hunting, early exploration of this part of the world.
Yeah, there's one book called The Cherokee Ghost Dance by McLaughlin. I'd have to be up looking at my books actually.
Yeah.
But that's a great book. But I'll have a list of books on my website too.
Okay,
now,
great.
As far as what we're looking at around me right now, I've got all the old remember the Harding books?
No.
Steel traps, the science of trapping, the wolf trapping. I got all these old books, and I'm a believer in technology. But let me tell you something: if something ever happened to our internet, the electrical grid,
Yeah.
the skies, and all this stuff, or something ever went wrong. If you depend on a digital library for information, you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
So keep your hard copies. I've got a vast library of homesteading books, how to garden, how to hunt, how to prepare food, most of which we already know
Right.
by heart.
But it doesn't help to have doesn't hurt to have a reference,
No, hard copies I like to be able to hold a book in my hand.
Yep.
I grew up in the old days. When you at night you're supposed to be asleep and you got your flashlight and you're reading a book under the covers.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, my first was The Life of James Fenimore Cooper.
Oh yeah,
it was one of the first books, and it was in large print. Yeah,
the leather stocking tales.
Yep, and I was one of the things about primary reference is what I also call that too, because when I was working on these historical firearm stuff, you could not really go on the internet and get some of those histories because the internet is filled with things that people thought were important enough to scan and post. So you will never get, say, somebody else put me on this, but my main thing was On the Border with Crook, which was the Apache Wars told by Crook's scribe. And you just not going to get that on the internet because much of it would seem boring to even a historian. They said, well, we don't need to know exactly how they rigged that saddle to chase for the Apaches to fight in the desert. That's not going to be on the internet. That's in your primary sources, which is a hard copy in a library somewhere. Hopefully you can get at it, because otherwise the knowledge becomes very winnowed down. Yeah.
Yeah, they left out all them important things you need to know if you were actually going to do this.
Yep.
Now, Google does have the advanced Google book searches. You can find some pretty good old books that are copyright free.
Yeah.
And I've got a vast library of digital books, but you can't beat a good hard copy too.
Well, I want to probably drop off, but I was going to talk to you just last about the public land access here, and like this is like after this mapping project and all. I mean, you located here because of the vastness of the Nantahala, pretty much, right? And the access to public lands.
Yes. I'm a cross-country type of person. I don't like to go on trails that are established because everybody else is on the trails, and I know that a lot of places they don't like you to get off the trails. But when the world gets to the point of where you got to be they give you a GPS that they wired on you, and you got to stay on this trail when you're hiking.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be gone by then. But I'm a cross-country person, but as far as trails, we got the Appalachian trails right here. The Bartram trails are all over here.
That's William Bartram?
All over. Yeah, William Bartram.
And I saw the thing, the sign, the historical sign for William Bartram, and my sister had given me one of his books. And do you know much about him?
Bartram?
Yeah.
I know everything there is to know about him in this part of the country.
Yeah.
I've detailed his travels as well as can be done, but he's not exactly like a military journal. He was seems like Bartram recorded things, but he might have went back and tried to fill in days after he wrote.
Yeah.
Some things don't really match up, but yeah, I've mapped him from Charlestown, South Carolina, up to the Savannah River across South Carolina, and right up he came up the Little Tennessee River here. He came to Calloway, and went to the council house and described the Cherokee council house.
Got you. What years was this?
1775.
Yeah, and for people that don't know, what did William Bartram? What was his major thing he did?
He was a botanist. He was a Quaker, and he had such a great temperament that one day he ran into a Creek Indian down in Alabama, and this Indian had just something happened. And he said, I'm going to kill the first white man that I meet. Well, it had happened to be William Bartram. And William Bartram came up to him and was so jovial and put out his hand that this Indian was just astonished, and he was made kind of friendly.
Yeah.
But he discovered rare plants and magnolias and different type of rare shrubs. And one of them, I can't remember the name of it now, I'm growing out here. They're extremely rare. He got seeds off of rare plants and took them back to the botanical gardens. His father was a horticulturist and had gardens. And some of the only species that we have now of these things left are what he gathered.
Wow.
But the Indians loved him. He knew he got along with the Indians. And they showed him things, and he actually traveled over the mountains and ran into Attacutaculla, who was a great war chief of the Cherokee. And Attacutaculla said, "You better get out of this country. War is breaking out."
Yeah.
And he went on back down to Charlestown at that time.
Wow. And did those we won't go into all those wars, but I know you had a history of Doublehead up there that I was really interested in.
Yeah, that's Alabama history there.
That's Alabama.
Yeah, Doublehead lived on near Gunners. Not Gunners. Florence in the Florence area.
Gotcha.
Doublehead Resort and all that back up in there. Yeah, he was a Cherokee chief that. Well, he was a pretty important man in North Alabama. Up here now, the warrior was Dragon Canoe, 1775. Before the Cherokees got into a war with the British in 1759. They boycotted Fort Loudon over in Tennessee, and,
right?
And then
Loudon's right on the Tennessee River. I remember.
Yes.
Yep.
And so they broke bad with the British, and so the British they got into a war. 1760, Archibald Montgomery brought the British Army from Charlestown, marched all the way through the mountains right here, and he didn't make it here. He got to Otto, just over the Georgia line. The Cherokees ambushed him and shot up 100 of his men, and they just put their tail between their legs, went back to Charlestown. The British were embarrassed, most powerful nation on earth, sent another army in 1761, and they brutally came in and they had black slaves carrying their food. They had cattle. They had Chickasaws and Catawba scouts so that they could actually catch the Cherokees.
Yeah.
They never caught the Cherokees, but they burned 15 of their towns here. So wiped them out right here. But there was about 60 towns total. 15 years later, the revolution breaks out. Cherokees, the British said, okay, if you help us defeat the Americans, well, we'll give you all your land, you'll keep your lands.
Yeah.
They said, okay, we fought the British last time, we better ally with them. Well, then the war breaks out, they fall on the settlements, and then North Carolina sends this big army in, South Carolina sends an army. They burn 52 Cherokee towns and destroy everything. Right. It just totally breaks the nation down.
Those are colonial armies.
Yes. Well,
right.
That was the yeah.
Wow.
That was the colonists.
What is it?
It was American rebels.
Yeah. So much of that history is just lost. I mean, I don't even know that it's taught unless you seek it out.
It is. There's not a lot. There's been books written about some of this, but it's the best thing I found out of these wars was that they kept detailed military journals.
Yeah.
Detailed the trails.
So
right.
I was able to
reconstruct a lot of trails off of this history.
Yeah.
And reconstruct the history because of the journals.
Yeah.
But I divided the thing up into eras. The 1700 territorial claim where they were hunting in Kentucky and Tennessee, and then the traders come in 1720, and the trade picks up.
Right.
Which is the beginning of the end for the Indians because
and then the deerskin trade really started overwhelming things after that, right?
Yeah, because instead of just killing enough deer and game to satisfy their needs for the year, well, the more deer they killed, well, the more trade goods they could get, the more cloth they could get, the more beads, the more trade goods, so
and the more guns, because that's what they were.
Yeah. That was the deal, though. Once you got, if you break bad with the Americans or the British, well, guess what? They embargo you. You don't get any lead guns or goods anymore.
Yeah.
So then they come after you.
Gotcha.
So you got the wars, you got the trade, you've got the treaties and boundaries. There was numerous treaties made over the years where this territory was chiseled away, piece by piece by piece by piece. The wars, of course, forced them to
concede territory, right? Yeah.
And then by 1817 and 1819, after the Revolutionary War, Cherokee's just been really trodden down up here, and white settlers started flooding in here. Well, these are the military people that invaded are coming back into the land that they saw, this beautiful valleys. Yep. And they want this land. So they come back in. The government makes a treaty in 1870 and 1819. They told the Cherokees where I live. Now, this is the Eastern Band. You can stay here, and we'll give you 640 acres of land, and you can keep your houses, and you become American citizen, or you can go over with the Indians over the mountains. Mm-hmm. This time they went over to Murphy, in that area, and that was still Indian land. About 100 families took these 640-acre reserves, and that's a square mile. So that that's a lot of square miles up down the rivers. White people said the Indians ain't gonna stay here. They're heathens. The heathens don't belong in a Christian land. I mean, some of them were like very anti-Christian in their love for their neighbor. Mm-hmm. It seems to me. So North Carolina sent in the federal government surveyed off their lands. North Carolina said, send in our surveyors and subdivide their lands and sell them. And so they came in here and they sold the Cherokee lands out from under them.
Gotcha.
To white people that didn't even know the Indians were here. They'd come over, buy a piece of land, come over, and they're like, hey, there's a Cherokee family living over here on our land. They got 2 fields, 20 acres apiece. They got peach trees. They got cattle. And a lot of the people said, get off. This is our land. And so they burned down their houses, and there began a civil rights story that nobody knows about.
Right.
At that time. Everybody knows about the Trail of Tears.
Sure. 1835
to 1838, but not many people know about how the Indians here were treated and how their lands were, and they were American citizens.
Right.
And the federal government came back later, and there were 20 years of litigation and compensation back to some of the Indians that lost their lands. But this history, and I call this last episode, Those Who Remained. About 500 Cherokees were able to hang on here, and with the help of some of the white people that could represent them in the courts, because they had no rights.
Right.
They were able to take money that the government gave the Indians that went out west, got money. So they got their money that they would have got going out west, and they bought land here. So that's where the land came from.
Okay.
It's not a reservation like out west.
Right.
They own their land, and they have their own tribal government, and they're wonderful people, and I love working with them.
Yeah.
And I work for them. I don't represent them. I don't speak for them.
Right.
I'm blessed to be able to get grants from them to help them recover their history. That's my what I do.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, I'm telling you, it's an incredible thing to look at and what you've done with that, and to look at what you've drawn on to get it. I find that kind of, it's lost history, but it makes wandering in the woods 1,000 times more intense to me to know what has happened in that place over a course of centuries, and to imagine people swapping those bison hides or drifting through those salt pans and salt licks, and then coming back to what were real towns. I mean, I've been on the Little Tennessee River, where there were like real settlements, real towns, and there were hubs for trade before the white men got here too. So the idea of these forests in another time it's hard to, it's not really that hard for me to imagine in this place where I'm on the prairie in Montana. It's pretty hard for me to imagine the millions of buffalo and the warring bands of say Blackfeet and Sioux or Crow. It's a little bit harder. There's something about the Smoky Mountains that holds like the spirits and the history in a way that open country doesn't.
Yes.
You've experienced the West too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I've been out. In fact, a while ago, you were talking about lightning. I was up in the high Uintas, way up above the tree line one day, and this thunderstorm hit, and there was no place to go. I laid down, and I just prayed that I wasn't going to get struck by lightning. It was striking all around us.
Yeah.
It was like scary.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know what the weirdest thing is, though? To eastern, southern guy like me, you drive out there, and you hit Montana, and it's like, God, look, there's the Rocky Mountains. Mm-hmm. Well, you're driving about 70 miles an hour, and you drive. With the mountain that's still there, when are you going to get there?
Right, yeah.
You see them about 2 days before you get there.
You bet, yeah.
Flat land, and then finally they rise up. But I love the Rockies, too.
Yeah, well, this has been fun, Lamar. One thing I was going to ask you, and another thing that's been lost, too, briefly. Do you know Doug Halls Davis in Missoula?
I do.
The filmmaker.
Yes.
And so Doug, I hadn't seen Doug in a few years, but Doug put me on to the music of a mutual friend of ours, Ned Mudd.
Oh, yeah, Ned's a good friend, man. I just talked to him yesterday.
And we still listen to, I tell you, something Hard Time in America or whatever the one he's.
Foobar America.
Foobar America.
Yeah, beyond all recognition.
Yeah, and I have my son and daughter they still like it, but they grew up on Ned Mudd's because he was doing the soundtrack to Doug Halls Davis's films.
Yeah.
And did a heck of a job. I mean, it's so cool.
Some of his films, I don't remember what all we did with him. But,
well, my favorite one is about Kent Bonar, the naturalist. He did a film. It's in I think it's in Missouri, I think, and he's just a botanist and a botanical illustrator. Very eccentric guy, lives way out in the middle of the woods with a bunch of hound dogs, and is one of the greatest botanical illustrators ever. And how Doug found him, I can't remember, but it's those. When I came up here today, I meant to ask you if you're still in touch with Ned Mudd because
yes,
and he's still a lawyer in Birmingham.
Friends. Yeah, he doesn't practice law. He hadn't practiced law in years.
Yeah,
in fact, he more just advised us. Well, we had Ray Vaughn was our principal attorney. Ray and Ned and myself, they called us the Three Amigos.
Uh-huh.
And, I had my two lawyers, and nobody messed with me.
Yeah. It's like the modern version of a bodyguard.
Ray Vaughn would call me up, and he'd say, Lamar, said, "You just sued Alabama Power today." And I say, "I did? Great." I say, I was the eternal plaintiff.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Yeah.
I've been deposed so many times, I had to start reading all my depositions to make sure I didn't get crossed up, and then pull out one from over here and said, "You said this over here."
Yeah.
And I made a man mad one day. It was over the air pollution in Alabama and the Gulf, the refineries killing the trees up here, the air pollution.
Yeah.
So we had a lawsuit going on, and Ori Laux was a scientist that worked on all this up here. He wrote a book about it, and I'm in the deposition, and this attorney's for the power companies there, and he says, "So what do you base this da-da-da on?" I said, "Well, Dr. Ori Laux has done this study." He said, "No." And finally he said, "Do you see Ori Laux in this room?" And I looked under the table, and I looked over here, and I looked around the corners, and that guy jumped up, his knuckles were white. And Ray Vaughn said, "Lamar, just answer the questions." But anyway, I love to mess with those guys.
Well, y'all are kind of an all-star team of that. I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna write my memoirs. I need to write all this down.
You do, and the reason I had wanted to talk with you about all this stuff for a long time, but the reason it come up was that those guys sent me the book, Robert Moore's book, On Trails, and I'm reading Robert Moore's book, and I like it. It's a good book. It's really interesting. And here's a whole chapter on Lamar Marshall and your work with the Cherokee trail system.
Yeah.
And y'all are eating the black bear ribs.
Yeah.
In there, and I thought, you know what, I'd like to get some of that bear meat too.
Well, you just had some. So.
And my goal has been achieved. Yeah.
That's good too, isn't it?
It's really good, man. Also, the stuff in that stew that come from your garden, it's not black-eyed peas. What are you running?
We call them October beans up here. There's October beans, and we grow a lot of greasy backs or green beans. We didn't have greasy backs in there, but then I grow Yukon Gold potatoes. I like the kind that's got the butter already in them.
Yeah, yeah.
So almost all that came out of my garden. I grow onions and garlics, and during certain times of year I grow a lot of lettuce too. I love greens.
Yeah, for sure.
But I just threw everything in there. I didn't do a lot. It's kind of an Italian pot roast recipe.
Gotcha.
But
is it black bear ham meat?
That was shoulder. It was
shoulder.
That was. And the ham, man, the ham's really tender.
Yeah.
I mean, that was tender enough though when you pressure cook it.
Oh man, yeah, you kind of don't see how you could beat it, especially when it's cold like this. It's like energy.
Oh. Yeah, the bear meat has a lot of fat in it. In fact, sometimes I save a lot of the bear fat and I take it down to my friends that like to use it to grease up leather with it.
You bet. Yeah.
Original, real bear grease.
Yep. You ever read The Yearling? The book about
I know the book, but I can't remember.
That's the only kind of fat they had. Because they couldn't, the cows in the Everglades, they didn't have enough, they had milk, but it wasn't enough cream, so he hunted bear for bear fat. That's what they rendered everything, and they preserved stuff in it.
Yeah, and it lasts. They used to bury it in the ground, and if you keep it cool, it doesn't go rancid.
Yeah.
And it's clear. My wife made bear soap that year before last.
Yeah.
She makes soap, and so we decided to, try bear fat. And it made I barely got clean with it, but it was a joke.
Yeah.
Somebody said,
I give it a hell of an effort.
One day this guy in front of this family says, "Gosh, do you eat bear?" And I said, "Nah, I normally wear my clothes." That got away with him.
Well, I'll sign her off, man. But you got any plans for the year? And I know you got your fishing kayak. You said you're gonna get it out.
Yeah, I got that thing sitting out there that's gonna dry rot if I don't get out there on the river.
Yep.
And all my hooks gonna get rusty sitting out there not used.
Are you done with the trails project?
I'm not gonna quit doing the culture heritage. I work with the Qualla Historical Society, so I've got 100,000 archives on my computer, and I'm gonna continue to volunteer to work with them and to continue to work on these story maps.
Gotcha.
I can't stop doing historical stuff. It's just in my blood.
You bet.
But I am gonna take more time to fish and to hunt. And, I don't like living off the kill of my neighbors.
Right.
They're very good about giving me, shoulder, turkey legs.
Yeah.
I want to kill them. I want a breast. I ain't got a turkey breast.
Well, I know he convinced you that the legs were the best part.
If you, my wife found a process for like pressure cooking them for about 8 hours.
Yeah.
Getting the meat off and then grind it, making a turkey salad out of it.
Yeah.
You can sustain yourself, except I don't know if the electricity that you burn up
quite equals the calories you get in.
Or the cost.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, you got some good friends up in here, man. This is a fine part of the world, Lamar. I'm gonna run off with you, and I appreciate it so much.
I've enjoyed it. It's like a reunion.
It is, yeah. All right, man. Talk to you.
Okay, Hal.